My name is Bruce Murray, and I'm the vice chair for the Progressive Caucus of Democrats Abroad, joined by Caitlin Kennedy, our chair, and Sue Alksness, our other vice chair. And we're very happy to be here with you this evening with a kind of why and what and how approach. And the why question has to do with why kitchen table talks. We're in proDA committed to getting out the vote, and we believe that perhaps the most effective way to do that is to advocate for issues that mean so much to us that they mobilize us to get out and vote for candidates in races that are most important in the United States. We're going to be thinking about that this evening when we talk about topics for kitchen table talks. And kitchen table talks are something that, to the best of my knowledge, which is limited, started in 2019 at the end, leading up to the 2020 primary and then general election, when Democrats Abroad was working on its Democrats Abroad party platform. And it was envisioned that people all over Democrats Abroad in small groups would get together and talk about issues that were most important to them, that there would be one host, there would be one moderator and one note taker, and the note taker would be responsible at the end of, say, a 1 hour chat, a talk, for submitting the results, the most important points that came out of the discussion into a Google Doc that was a kind of reservoir for opinions and thoughts about what ought to be in the Democrats Abroad platform. And we are very interested in using that tool and organizing some of our own kitchen table talks at the beginning of 2024, also encouraging all of us to encourage our country committees to do so, and to perhaps do so in a way that might involve proDA in some way if that is desired. There are also other caucuses who are working on kitchen table talk packages, including the Environment and Climate Crisis Council, and keep an eye out for that. And I want to say that that is a little bit the why and the what and the how. We're going to talk today from a progressive standpoint about how we can select topics on our really full plate of unfinished business that we want to prioritize and think about kitchen table talks designed for our work on the party platform for Democrats Abroad, and also for other Democratic Party purposes, but also for legislative work, also independent of party platforms. Because, Sue, might you be willing to just say a couple sentences about that nexus between Democrats Abroad party platform and the DNC party platform, and the influence, limited influence that we have on the DNC party platform?
Sure. I will say I'm not an expert. I haven't participated in working on the national platform for the Democratic Party, but I can say that my understanding from people who are more informed than I am is that the DA platform and other state party platforms really stand independent of the national platform. There isn't really a mechanism for the state party platforms to directly influence the national platform, particularly for a small state party like DA, where we have a really small number of delegates going to the national convention and only one representative on the national platform committee. That representative would be selected by one of the presidential campaigns and then presented to DA for a vote, but the person's kind of picked by the campaign. I suppose we could reject the person if there was some issue, whatever, but basically that's how that works with the national platform. Same with the credentials and rules committees at the convention. And then that person would potentially have some influence on the platform, but limited. and focused on the real priority areas for DA that other state parties wouldn't be touching on. So things to do with Americans living overseas primarily. And then I don't know. There is a group of there are people working to try to influence the national platform earlier in the process, like lobbying influencers and people who can who will be on the committee by virtue of their roles within the Democratic National Committee. So there is an opportunity for that for those who are well connected and know how to work their networks.
Okay, thanks, Sue. I said full plate, but actually, when we're thinking about potential topics for our work and for kitchen table talks, there might even be three plates. And the first plate is one where we have proDA endorsed resolutions. We started work in the spring of this year, leading up to our June AGM, with a group of proDA endorsed resolutions. And in the end, three of them passed. I'm going to share my screen briefly to show you that list. You can see that in June, a resolution in support of an executive order for a federal reparations commission passed in the last minute. We didn't have any time to consider resolutions, but with a motion from the floor, boom, we got the resolution for a federal reparations commission passed. And Antar, would you like to say a few words about that?
Hey, Bruce. Hey, everybody. Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about it, Bruce. Yeah, Caitlin made a motion, and the perception of the motion was to pass the resolution, which was really great because going through the kind of rigmarole that would necessarily get it put to a vote when people were clearly trying to shut the resolution process down at that juncture was crucial because it had a time limit of Juneteenth. So we were able to get all the letters out to all the elected officials once the resolution got signed or enacted. And we sent it to Biden. Biden was charged to carry out his promise to support a study of reparations project federally with the letter that was engineered by dint of the resolution. Of course, Biden failed to do that because Biden's trying to extract Black labor and votes out of the wave of political activism from reparative justice advocacy while giving nothing in return, which is why it's part of the reason why he's losing the Black vote now. And no amount of saying y'all ain't Black if you don't vote for me is going to change that. The reparations movement is still continuing. The next hot spot is going to be New York. So you can, just, keep that in mind. If you forget about it, it's okay. I have a strong feeling, that sometime next month, somewhere in the, say, middle to late middle of the month, there will be a piece of breaking news coming out of New York. But I didn't tell you guys that, and this is not going to be shared, so don't worry about that. So yeah, we're not stopping. Biden is, Biden is what he is, he's what he's always has been. But we're working around that, and the eye is still on the prize, and we'll go state by state until the White House hears what we're doing, smells what we're cooking.
Thank you very much, Antar. I can smell it right now. And what the Antar is saying is that our work is not done. We'll talk a little bit more in the discussion about how we may pick this topic up again and focus on it in December and again moving forward. Sue has a hand up.
Oh yeah, I was just going to ask Antar, I think so the Progressive Caucus wants to figure out like what things we want to champion for the DA platform. I assume the reparations task force within DA will be working to ensure that reparations is adequately included in the platform. So proDA can kind of have that like on our secondary list where we're there to support, but we know reparations task force will lead the charge. Is that accurate? I'm actually keeping notes from today's meeting as well, so I wanted to.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that, Sue. I mean, you know, what I would say is this, I mean, there's lots of, I mean, sometimes honestly, I feel like, I'm overtaxed with trying to keep track of the almost limitless developments in this form of advocacy, both like local, state, federally, internationally, transnationally, regionally. It is quite, tricky to keep tabs on everything. So if the Progressive Caucus wanted to co-lead a charge to do this, and in conjunction with the Global Black Caucus, because with renewed interest in getting involved deeper in this advocacy, I think I can. I don't want to make it sound bad, but I could start using other people as a crutch to prop myself up because I'm getting weathered. I was literally telling Caitlin last night that if HR 40, a federal commission, got enacted, I would probably retire because I need a break. I need rest. I don't know how y'all keep up with all these different political things. I'm worn down to the bone with the reparative justice stuff, and I just want it to just be done with so I can go to sleep. I'm like a vampire, just wants to go back to sleep now. So yeah, I'm willing to co-lead anything. I respect, you're asking if I want to spearhead, but I'm willing to have other people, fight.
I think that we should just we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We take a lot of the language from the resolutions, and we have a draft platform place. So I would say, Sue, like Bruce and I were talking about this earlier, that the RTF would definitely be involved, and we're happy to be in contact in future about that. But okay. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to say though, because I think it's important that as the kind of the narrative around reparations consistently modifies and concretizes itself to a form of advocacy and justice that we can envision. It's no longer just an aspirational thing, but it's really kind of in this kind of interstitial space where it was once considered unimaginable, and now it is considered imaginable. We need only conjecture and inform ourselves about how it has been done and how it can be done today. It's important that kind of Democrats abroad stake out a niche, for if we don't, we risk having all of our advocacy be kind of subsumed in larger forces that are actually trying to wrest control of this movement going forward. So I think one of the ways that Democrats abroad uniquely can not only just advocate for this form of justice, but also carve something out is to argue for the extraterritoriality of any and all reparative justice legislation. When you think about, like, for instance, the Medicare Portability Task Force, this is designed to extend the already existing benefits that exist as Medicare Part D or Part C for those who have liver or cirrhosis kind of misfunctions, to extend those benefits across the sea to Americans who might not be living in countries that have universalized healthcare and stuff like that. The same needs to be argued for reparative justice legislation, because if and when something happens, those Americans, who've been, pushing with me across, the world for reparative justice, there's a very healthy chance they might be cut out because of territoriality that will only extend it to the geopolitical borders of the contiguous United States or even the states themselves. So that's something that we need to like expand our.
Thanks so much.
No problem.
Okay. If you look back to the screen for a moment, you'll see that actually 3 of our 5 resolutions passed. The next ones passed when we finally got around to considering resolutions in November. They were a resolution in support of a 21st century economic bill of rights and a resolution to keep fossil fuels in the ground, along with 2 other climate-related resolutions. We're very happy about that. And for all of the resolutions that have been passed, there is a kind of impulse now to make sure that they also find expression in our platform, and that in making them living resolutions, not just gathering dust, that we continue thinking about how we can support the sentiment of the resolutions with legislative action. So they're also on our first plate. Then we have 2 resolutions that we feel were very important and might have passed, and we want to continue working on them. They weren't considered because we ran out of time. I'd like to ask Sue and Caitlin to talk about those, beginning with Sue, who was the author of this next resolution.
Yeah, I'm going to be very, very brief. The resolution regarding the use of funds from undisclosed sources during Democratic Party primaries really tries to address what we've been seeing in recent years, where like funds from sources not aligned with the Democratic Party, but sometimes far-right extremist organizations and individuals are buying up lots of ad time and even donating directly to campaigns of centrist or conservative or moderate or Democrat candidates in primaries, and swaying the results of those, particularly in location in district, like congressional districts, for instance, that are solid blue. So so they're weighing in and decreasing the chances for more progressive candidates, including in many cases candidates of color, often women of color, who are putting forward more progressive positions on things. So I think definitely this will be something to include in the platform for DA, as well as of course ending Citizens United, which also relates to this.
Okay, and let's move on to Caitlin to talk about the 5th resolution, which she authored.
I wrote a draft resolution that also didn't go for a vote, was essentially killed, to recognize Alaskan Indigenous sovereignty. And Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous rights are kind of a gaping hole in the Democrats Abroad platform from this past cycle, and just in general past history of in Democrats Abroad, from what I've also been told. But this resolution, I'll send the link in the chat. I know Bruce has it on the screen, but then people can take a look at the resolution itself and read. It kind of lays out the history of the colonization of Alaska, and denial of right to self-determination, and the kind of illegitimate statehood vote that happened in 1959, when according to international standards, only Indigenous Alaskans should have been able to vote if they wanted to become a United States state. And in fact, Indigenous Alaskans were barred from participating through many of the all too familiar voter suppression tactics that we've seen target also Black voters, including literacy tests, racist policies that made an Indigenous person have 5 white people vouch for them before they could vote, outright violence, white gangs at polling stations who would attack Indigenous people who tried to show up and vote in their own statehood referendum. And up until that point, Alaska was recognized in the United Nations as being under US colonial rule. And after that fake statehood vote, it was removed. So this was supposed to be to recognize that history, and also just simply say that we support Indigenous sovereignty, recognition of that, and also that that we were calling for an end to the Willow Project and these kind of big extractive fossil fuel projects that are taken, that are greenlit kind of without the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples. And it's kind of an extension of the whole colonial history. So this resolution I drafted in coordination with Alaskan Indigenous leaders. And so it was very disappointing that after like almost 7 months of having to go back to them and be like, no, it's delayed, no, it's delayed, no, it's delayed, that our voting representatives collectively, the majority decided they would rather kill the resolutions than simply have an online vote, which would have been a very simple thing to do so that we could have at least shown the respect to vote on the resolutions. So I found that frankly very disappointing. So I've had some people reach out and say they want to work around the platform to make sure that stuff around Indigenous sovereignty and decolonization is included. Also for Hawaii, which is a particular case for Guam, for Puerto Rico. So would look forward to working with anyone who is interested in pursuing that as well. Yeah. So I tried to be as short as possible, but it's a bit complicated, I guess.
Caitlin, could you segue into our brief discussion on this first plate of potential topics for kitchen table talks, etc.?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So as Bruce was saying, we had some wins where, for example, the reparations resolution, the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights, the keeping the fossil fuels in the ground. But we can continue to build on those wins. We also have some issues that proDA members had identified as very important going into the resolutions process, which weren't considered. And so we kind of, as a group, wanted to discuss what we think might be the best avenue to continue pursuing progress in these areas. So there's a couple of ways we could continue doing that. There's, of course, the opportunity to hold kitchen table talk discussions around these issues with the potential to draft DA platform planks. And so that's one option. There's also the option of, other ways that we could do issue advocacy going into 2024. For example, holding, educational events that have a legislative advocacy component built in. So we just kind of as a group wanted to decide what we thought might be the most effective strategies going forward to have our say, to coordinate with groups stateside, the best way that we could use our time and resources to affect the most change. So I don't know if anyone here on the call has any ideas or opinions about that. I think if so, you can just feel free to unmute because I think we're such a small group that, and if it gets crazy, we'll just use the chat box. Alan, is your hand up? You can feel free to unmute. Or you are muted, but.
I'm muted.
Oh yeah, now I can hear you. Now I can hear you.
I think that these issues are all interrelated. I mean, if I think what it requires is some kind of broad kind of educational campaign to like raise people's consciousness or awareness of the colonial policies that are embedded in U.S. history. Okay, it's like impossible to avoid that. Okay, and it links up to the whole question of reparations. These kind of issues are inseparable, and to put the history of like colonialism and the impact on indigenous people, is to separate that from like the history in relationship to slavery, it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's all part of like a certain kind of political consciousness that keeps getting repeated.
Yeah, those are really good points. And we were really glad, those of us who are working on the Alaska resolution were really, really glad to have the support of the Democrats Abroad Reparations Task Force And that's a really good point about thinking about ways we can be more intersectional, or we can elevate, you know, these histories together, because people in DA have largely, you know, really are excited to endorse reparations advocacy for Black Americans, and linking that in could be a way to generate more awareness too about Indigenous rights and Indigenous sovereignty.
I mean, I can say one other thing, and I just hope this doesn't upset people, but the fact of the matter is that the US support for like Israel's policies in terms of like Palestinian people is an exact reflection of US policy in relationship to its own indigenous people. I mean, these things are connected.
You're right, and we are. I mean, I don't know if it's fair to say there's a challenge in Democrats abroad around what's called a foreign policy ban, where there's a communications policy that states that Democrats abroad members in their official capacity or any kind of organ of DA isn't allowed to commentate on US foreign policy or the domestic policy of other countries. And there's other people within DA who are really trying to look at whether, you know, we need to rethink that policy, or what we can do, how we want to organize around, or how we, you know, as people, whether we try to do that through DA or in our private capacities, how we can still make a difference. So if you're interested, Alan, you could send me your email address and we could keep talking about that. I hope that was fair for me to meeting Bruce and Sue. I'm not sure.
No, I think that was great what you said. I just thought I would just add that the rationale for those who aren't familiar with DA's policy of not commenting on U.S. foreign policy or what's happening in other countries. Well, for one, in terms of foreign policy, there is a concern around, you know, like that's the responsibility of the State Department, et cetera, and we wouldn't want to be, you know, causing problems for that. But the issue becomes much more kind of granular and immediate for DA when people are considering our members who live around the world. So we can imagine that our members in some countries would not be safe if their name, like volunteer names are on the website. You'd be able to find people who are associated with DA, and if DA put out some kind of position on an issue in that country, you know, it could have people be at risk with relation to with the authorities or vigilantes or whatever. So that's the rationale that's put forward. There's some concern that the policy has not necessarily been evenly respected around different issues, and so that there might be some differences in terms of north-south and equity deserving movements and issues in the news. So that's a little more explanation around that, just so that people understand that. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
I'm looking to see if anyone would like to talk a little bit more about our resolution topics. If not, you can see I've scrolled down a little bit and I'm getting ready to ask you to put on your seatbelts as I rev through our 2023 proDA member survey with a second plate of topics we might consider. Is there anybody in the queue or have a hand up?
Well, would this be the time to say something about the John Lewis Freedom to Vote Act?
First of all, strap on your seatbelt, and I'm going to go through the whole list, and then voting rights. Bruce Miller will be the first one to talk about the John Lewis Freedom to Vote Act.
Okay.
I'm going to say that I was pleasantly surprised because I looked at our survey results earlier today, and we had fewer than 70, now we have more than 80 responses, and we have different categories. The two most relevant for today are highest overall goals and policies that deserve greatest attention. And the numbers you can see are the numbers of people who say, this is my highest priority. This is the highest overall goal. So I'll just say 61, you can see sufficient efforts to combat climate change. Also, decreased power of wealth in our economy. And then moving down with other highest goals, stronger social infrastructure for working families and underserved communities, foreign policies which focus on democracy, human rights, diplomacy, peace, and economic fairness, and safe and welcoming United States for all. Boom. So revving on to the second group, policies that deserve the greatest attention. Here we have number one, the John Lewis Freedom to Vote Act, expanded Medicare and codified reproductive health care rights, reasonable gun laws, including an assault weapons ban, sales ban, and universal background checks, tax on extreme wealth of the top 0.1% of US households, national climate emergency declaration, and federal minimum wage increase to at least $15 an hour. Those were the top policies, those deemed to deserve greatest attention among the 83 replies we have so far. I'm going to keep those up and ask again now, would any of you like to chime in and give opinions with in this list, those that you think deserve the highest priority for kitchen table talks, for working on a platform plank, and or for legislative advocacy moving into 2024. I'm going to say Bruce Miller has the first option.
Okay, well, I'll talk about the new Voting Rights Act, which is still very much needed. The one thing that we did get enacted in the last Congress, toward the end, was a renewed Electoral Count Act, and that addressed the crackpot theory that was kind of at the center of the insurrection attempt on January 6th, to say that, the vice president can just, count any votes he wants and just personally decide the result of the presidential election. So that was at least one success that got through, that says that no, the vice president can't do that. I mean, there's more that needs to be done, like requiring the states to respect the popular vote when selecting electors, because those are selected by the state legislature. But the big one is the Voting Rights Act, and that's what the John L. Lewis Freedom to Vote Act was designed to do, to reinforce it, or rather to reinstate it after it's been significantly reduced in its scope by the Supreme Court rulings. And it's important to know John Roberts, the Supreme, the Chief Justice, has basically devoted his entire adult career to promoting voting suppression as one of his main goals. And the big hit on the Voting Rights Act was in 2013, 10 years ago now, in what was known as the Shelby County decision, that removed what was known as the pre-clearance provision. That required states and some localities that had a demonstrated record of attempts at discriminatory districting practices or voting practices, that any change in their redistricting plans and would have to have the Federal Justice Department review it for consistency before it could go into effect. That was a very effective tool and a big deterrent to states to not push the envelope on illegal voting practices and illegal redistricting practices. There are still provisions of the Voting Rights Act that are still in effect, but there was a new decision just about a week ago in the 8th Federal Circuit Court, that said that private individuals, private parties like voting rights groups or the ACLU or activist groups of some other kinds, political parties even, would not be able to bring suit to require enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. And that's a huge thing, because of all the cases that have been brought to court, only maybe a fifth, if even that many, were initiated by the federal Justice Department. Most were initiated by private actions. And so, there's plenty of precedent. I mean, there've been hundreds of cases that have been brought, so there's plenty of precedent that is totally valid. But who knows? And two of the Supreme Court justices have indicated, they basically invited plaintiffs to challenge that particular provision or that particular issue. So we'll see how that goes. But the Congress has the ability to restore the Voting Rights Act and to write it in such a way that it can avoid the kind of cheap tricks that the Supreme Court used to like in Shelby County, to strike down provisions they didn't like. And Caitlin gave a great brief explanation of the kind of voter suppression practices that were common. There was in this year's elections in Mississippi, where the Democratic gubernatorial candidate came closer than any Democrat since the late 90s, 24 years of winning. And the day after the election, there was a report about how in one of the larger Black majority counties that they just ran out of ballots at the end of the day. Late in the afternoon, so many people had voted that they just didn't have any ballots left for people to use. And that's another one. There's infinite number of cheap tricks like that can be used in addition to legal actions that can restrict votes. And the Republicans are very serious about doing that. So, that is a really urgent thing to get passed. And also, the other thing I'll say about it, in terms of the democracy issue, I mean, you say democracy is on the ballot, and it's true, but in framing that issue as to people, just from what I see in the United States, and also from some other elections in other places, that just saying, oh, look, democracy is good and this other side doesn't like democracy, that doesn't quite cut it. It has to be given a sharper edge to be effective. And so that could be a very effective issue for the Democrats to say, look, the Republicans are trying to take away your right to vote. It's un-American. You can't allow this to happen, and really make an issue out of it. And I think that Voting Rights Act and highlighting some of the abusive practices is a good, concrete way for the Democrats to do that in the elections next year. And
Yes.
yeah, and it would hopefully get young voters out too to turn out, because it's going to be so important next year.
Before passing off to Stu, I want to say that in the interconnectedness of all this, I think I'll ask those who aren't speaking to go on mute so we can avoid the echo.
Yeah.
In order to get that so important John Lewis Freedom to Vote Act passed, we need the White House, we need the Senate, we need the House of Representatives, and then maybe we could get it passed. And if we did have the White House, Senate, and House, then it's likely that we could pass a number of other things too. So this issue advocacy is really something that is linked to our Get Out the Vote advocacy. Take it away, Sue.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm thinking about like, how do we want to have the Progressive Caucus have a meaningful contribution to the kitchen table talks process happening in DA, and also the development of our platform. I'll be honest, everybody, the platform in DA, once it's like made and published, like it doesn't really have a lot of impact. I know we want to say like, oh, it's going to help us get votes, but like people are not necessarily going to be going and reading our platform through. what I see as really the value of the platform process and the kitchen table talks is that it's an opportunity for people to have conversations and consider different kinds of policies that they might not have thought of before, or maybe they had rejected before. A good example would be reparations, where, you know, there's a big learning curve for people, you know, on that, and understanding like why it's needed. And, you know, we've been told for decades, like it's too expensive. It's not that it's even like it's not fair, like weird stuff, right? The twisted stuff that's out there. So, I'm looked at the list of what we've gone through so far, and I'm thinking about like also what is already like bread and butter Democratic Party stuff that the Progressive Caucus, obviously we support gun control. Obviously we support, I think across the Democratic Party, like, well, maybe Cinema and Manchin, I know she's not anymore, but you know, they're not anymore, but you know, generally across the Democratic Party, we're for voting rights. We want people to vote. So I think DA in general is going to support that. So I've looked through our list here and the places of what we've seen so far. And I also took a look at some of the categories of our 2020 platform. And it seems to me that where the Progressive Caucus can potentially add like understanding to expand people's views of things, like where we might be able to add value would be for one, around reparations. I know it's kind of bread and butter for DA, but I think there's still probably some confusion out there about that. I think the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights and things like a job guarantee, people are confused about that. And that could be something that we could push, you know, we could hold discussions on and raise awareness and understanding about, and it'd be great to have in the platform for DA. I think the climate stuff, we have the ECCC, they're covering that. And I think they're getting hopefully radical enough, you know, on that topic. It's possible on climate that the Progressive Caucus is needed to push harder. Bruce is on the ECCC working group, so he can keep his finger on that pulse. I think the Indigenous rights is something that is not at the top of the mind for people in DA generally, or our leadership. So I think that's a really important one for proDA to champion. A wealth tax, I think, would be also important. A lot of people are confused about how that would work. And foreign policies around like human rights and diplomacy and peace. Like an awful lot of people are just kind of not pushing back hard enough on military spending. Expanding Medicare and Medicare for all. We want Medicare for all again in our platform. DA has passed a resolution supporting that years ago, but we want to make sure that that stays in. And I would love to see us championing voting for, voting rights for the incarcerated. To me, like, it's crazy that people can't vote just because they're in prison. They didn't commit treason. Anyways, that's one I would really argue for, and against charter schools and the destruction of public education. So I don't know if anybody disagrees with any of those. I went through them fast, but if anyone thinks any of those don't belong on the list, or there's other things that come to mind where the Democrats don't necessarily all agree or all understand on something, I'd love to hear what other things people think we should be on our list, where the Progressive Caucus can, you know, raise awareness, help people understand things, and we can maybe have the most progressive platform in the party.
Take it away, Alan, and thank you, Sue.
Yeah, I think that the issues that Sue is raising, and the issues about what exactly do we mean by democracy, these are like important issues. So the question I have in terms of like the efficacy of like the Progressive Caucus is, are there any other progressive caucuses that we are connected with, that we are part of some kind of network of people who are like trying to push certain kind of issues? I have no idea whether this exists or not.
That's a great question too. I'll say 2 sentences and then maybe pass it back to Sue, who's working more with that kind of thing. Going back to that economic Bill of Rights, there are progressive groups who have been working on that in state parties in the United States. We now have Economic Bill of Rights resolutions passed in Massachusetts, in Arizona, in West Virginia, and in Democrats abroad. And as soon as the California Democratic Party can really meet and decide, we're certain it's going to decide in favor of a similar resolution. So that's one example, and Sue can say more.
Yeah, Alan, it's a great question. Like, we can find out more about what's happening in state party platforms through a couple of networks, but one is the state progressives network, which is folks who either are leading a progressive caucus within a state party or would like to form one. There are also in some states related kind of caucuses that are organized through Our Revolution or Progressive Democrats of America. Whether I'm not sure whether the work involved in finding out like everything that's happening in other states to have these kinds of things covered in their platforms. I'm not sure how good the return would be for us from that work. Like DA tends to have a very progressive platform, so I think we're already like ahead of a lot of those state parties, but we could possibly put out a request for some sample planks that people are promoting, and DA and proDA we could also share the planks that we're doing. Like, I think if we had something on Indigenous rights, that could actually be really valued by the other state party folks who are working on platforms and state parties and generating a similar kind of conversation across a range of states. Maybe the same thing with reparations. It's possible that not every state party is going to have a debate about whether that should or shouldn't be in their state party platform. So DA could help to raise that issue up.
By the way, I'm going to, in our follow-up message, make sure that the most important excerpts of this presentation we're showing will be included, so you can reference all on one page the links that we're providing. And I'm going to move on with an eye on the clock to our third plate, which is a table of contents of our 2020 Democrats Abroad platform. It seems to me that too is a source of table talk topics. And you can see there that there are many of them, but it's not too many to handle. And one thing that we can imagine too is how many of the things that we've talked about in the first two plates could feed into some of these categories. It starts with Americans abroad, and then goes all the way down to trade. And I think I'd just like to keep this on the screen and ask if some of us have questions or comments about these topics that are in the 2020 platform. And it's likely that many of them could be revised and expanded in 2024. A special interest too is looking, are there some blind spots? Are there some things missing here? And I'd like to ask all of you, what do you think?
Yeah, if I could jump in, that would be great. I think Bruce is also, the other Bruce is also in the queue, maybe has something that relates.
Yeah.
Yeah, I of course I kind of was really loved Sue's entire list there, honestly. Like, I'm kind of glad you didn't call me, because I was like, I need to process Sue's list. That was so comprehensive. But yeah, I totally agree about having Indigenous rights is obviously missing from this list. That's very glaring, and it's an opportunity for DA and proDA to kind of lead and have something that's not just kind of like lip service, but something that's maybe really in coordination with groups on the ground, with really like kind of what the demands really are, really embracing decolonization, which I think would be quite, I use this word sometimes like because I consider it a positive thing, but I know some people are like scary, but that would be very radical, like in a good way. I think, but yeah, so I think that would be something that I would love to work on with others, but also just I really wanted to kind of elevate and underline what Sue said about military spending, reducing our military spending, because I know something that many of us probably do feel strongly about is what's going on right now in Gaza with our taxpayer money, that weapons are being sent over there and are being used to kill people. And like, it might be one way that we can kind of like try to, that if we talk about military funding or weapons, export or whatever, taxpayer money being used for weapons export, it might be one way we can kind of get these ideas through, even if we, we might push for something that mentions direct situations. My fear is that it's going to be immediately shut down, but it might be a way we can continue to bring up these issues in a way that's not, directly referencing specific contexts, even if many of us probably do feel that specific contexts need to be raised. So anyway, those are thoughts I have around that. And yeah, Sue's saying military spending relates to climate change as well. Totally. So I think those would be really good things to work on. And I also know that Sam Goodman worked on the immigration policy plank last time. It's really good. I would love to work with him and anyone else on expanding on that, because I feel quite strongly about that. As a Texas voter, my mom's from the border, and it's really horrific what's going on down there.
So would you like to moderate this part of the discussion?
Hi, Bruce, thanks. Yeah, I think, do we have a queue? I'm not sure if Bruce Miller, are you back in the queue? Is that for a
Yeah, I
fresh?
was going to say something on this. Yeah, one thing on the Economic Bill of Rights, which I think is a great idea, and I'm glad that it's in there. And I mean, in terms of the kinds of issues the Democrats use to get people to go out to vote, I mean, we need to remember in the U.S. we're having the biggest union organizing wave we've seen since the 1930s, and my chronic worry is that the Democrats are too timid about fighting for their own side. But that's the side that really the candidates need to be fighting for, and they need to be emphasizing those issues. So, I mean, I know they're not going to read it directly off the platform positions, but as an issue, it's something they really need to pay attention to. I was also going to ask, I mean, one of the things in the polls, for the elections this year that's still showing up is how many people are concerned about abortion rights and safeguarding those. Is there a plank in the platform that addresses that in particular? I mean, gender equality is one of the items, but anyway, I mean, that's when it comes to fighting for your own side, the Democrat side among voters is really concerned about abortion rights. And third, on the kind of war and military budget related issues, without getting into topics that we're not supposed to be getting too heavily into. In terms of young voters, those kinds of issues are showing up as real concerns. And again, Democrats can't win without getting a solid vote among young voters and without getting those young voters out to the polls. So, hopefully the candidates will emphasize those issues. Like Joe Biden, one of his better political moves, I would say, was that thing where he went out on the auto workers picket line. That's the kind of thing that the party needs to be emphasizing, is my point. That was it.
Okay, sorry, I forgot I was moderating, and we do have a queue. So I think it's now Eric Marcus. Eric, there's only one Eric. It's Eric.
Hi, sorry to be late. Thank you. As you were speaking, as whomever was speaking and mentioning things, and mentioned the issue of those prisoners voting or having voting rights restored, it really I suppose I've mixed feelings on this, and there's lots of degrees of a viewpoint, I suppose. However, what came to my mind really is that this could be a lever of sorts, that just like students in university towns, if students in a university town is going to go vote, do they vote for their home district, wherever that may be in the world, or do they vote locally? And the same could be argued for prisoners. And I suspect that the answer would be that they have to vote in wherever their home district is, and that could then be a new constituency of sorts, or not even of sorts, actually, to whom the candidates could address themselves. And if they can get enough voice, if there can be reformative justice to the point where, maybe not for felonies, but for misdemeanors or marijuana-related things, what have you, I don't know, if the those voting rights can be restored, then that can be a new constituency to try and further the reforms that apply to them.
Thanks, Eric. That's a really good point. Alan, did you have something you wanted to share? I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, I wanted to share two things. One is like the point that Bruce Miller made just a while ago about Biden going out and joining the auto workers picket line. Whoever suggested he do that is someone who was on the ball, someone who was thinking like in terms of like potential voters and where their heads are at, okay? And I don't see that coming out of Biden at all in all of these other areas that we've been discussing, okay? That's one point. Second point is the reason I brought up the networks is that I know from my past history that the way that the policies of the Democratic Party were affected were pressures that were coming out from outside of the party platform, okay? And if there's a network of progressive people that are not necessarily like wedded to the kind of like more conservative policies of the Democratic Party, things can change. But if we look to like I hate to say, if we look to these stodgy kind of politicians who are running things won't change, okay? That's my
Thanks,
point.
Alan. I just popped in the chat my suggestion of supporting a national infrastructure bank, which which is Biden somewhat supports. So I think there's an opportunity there. And I don't know what DA had on corporate consolidation of power in the past, but potentially that could be something to address, because there's certainly a major issue around that. And when you have the kind of crazy campaign finance landscape that we have, like those two things combined are really dangerous and detrimental. Hey, Mohammed, thanks for joining. What would you like to share?
Yeah, thank you, Sue. Sorry, I was a bit late. I had something to do, but I put it into the chat. So we're speaking, right, the Youth Caucus, what we would like to see in the platform the other day. And this is like a rough list that we came up with. And I know some would fall under, right? So I think top one, education affordability. I haven't looked at the 2020 platform yet, but right, somehow that something that would address right, college costs, education costs, right, student loan debt, climate change, something big, and I agree with you. I work with Bruce on that, on the ECCC, so I'm more strong worded, right? Climate change, policy or like on the platform. Healthcare access, right? Criminal justice reform, especially criminal justice reform, where I feel like nothing much was done in terms of President Biden, and that can just be me, but right, I feel like there was this promises made, uh, especially after George Floyd and all that stuff happened, that we'll see some kind of reform. Nothing big happened, so that should be right. I think something needed. So, racial social justice, affordable housing, gun violence. So that's just a list of uh what we came up with within the youth caucus of right, just a not a full list, but just few issues that we would like to see on their platform.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Mohammed. That's really, really helpful to have that focus. Is the Youth Caucus going to do kitchen table talks?
We're still we're still talking about it. We're having changes within our steering committee, so probably after that, that's when we'll do it. But I don't think so right now. But we're still talking about it.
Right.
You know, it's kind of daunting if you just say, hey, are you going to do kitchen table talks? I felt like that when I first got started. But that 2020 kitchen table talk toolkit really helps. And after you look at that, it starts to look like it's getting pretty easy. And it motivates us at proDA to say it's likely that there will be a similar model. Democrats Abroad really doesn't have its kitchen table talk program set for 2024 yet. We think it's going to happen pretty soon. But in preparation, we are starting to plan our own kitchen table talks. We think it would be great if we could work together with the reparations task force on at least one. It would be great to participate with the youth caucus if the youth caucus desired that, and also to take a look at the great package that the ECCC has prepared for kitchen table talks. So I think we're a step ahead this evening, having had this discussion. And I'd like to close by pointing out that we are going to have some upcoming meetings, and all that we're talking about this evening will not go anywhere. We'll keep talking about it, looking for the opportunities to have the best progressive path forward for the best candidates to win, for the best administration to lead us down a progressive path in 2024 and beyond. And that includes our next monthly members meeting on December 2nd. That will be next Saturday. And then on January 6th, pretty impressive progressive Congressperson Jamie Raskin will be speaking to all of Democrats Abroad. He'll be focusing on January 6th. And it's possible that we'll have an opportunity to ask too, as we kind of suggested tonight, what does it mean to protect democracy? What does it have to do with ensuring that we have good voting rights, and then candidates who are elected who will fight for everyday working people? Then later in January, please save the date. It likely will be on the 29th of January. We'll have a monthly Mondays for Progressive Minds event, and we're looking to focus on arms control for a more livable world. And that hasn't completely taken shape yet, but it is. And we hope that it turns out to be a very successful event that also addresses some of the platform planks from 2020 and some of our progressive issues that are at high priorities for us. Sue and Caitlin, would either of you like to say a little more as we head on out?
I would just say that we have our regular monthly members meeting on Saturdays, like the first Saturday of the month at 9 a.m. Eastern time. And we were thinking that that would be the time that we would use for kitchen table talks, although it's possible that there will be a more compressed window for kitchen table talks within DA. Like they might need it to happen more quickly, in which case we'd need to schedule a couple couple of different sessions, like within like a 1 month or 6 week time frame. But if people can't make Saturday mornings and you're interested, like we could try to figure out a different time. Let us know.
And that's Saturday morning Eastern time, Saturday afternoon Central European time, and 9 o'clock in the evening in Beijing. And Eric Marcus, do you have your hand up?
Looks like Eric took his hand down. So I guess you're, yeah, okay. Eric's nodding. Yes, correct. It was a
All right.
legacy hand up.
Legacy hand up.
If I
Kate?
could, oh, sorry. If I could add two things from the reparations task force before everyone signs off, that would be really great. I'm pulling up the links, but Antar alluded to earlier, there may be some big news coming out of New York. However, as we all know in politics, it's never done until the bill is signed into law. So we really need all hands on deck to ensure that Governor Hochul signs the New York reparations bill into law. So if you have some time, it would be great if you could check out this post we have on the Reparations Task Force website. It has a link to a petition, and it also has a sample call script or email script to email or call Governor Hochul's office and urge her to sign this bill. It's really critical that we kind of like inundate her office in this critical moment before the holidays so that she knows this is a priority, because with so much going on in the world, we're afraid that also like certain things will slip through the cracks that should not slip through the cracks. Because also, as Alan said, all these issues are interconnected as well. But yeah, so if y'all have some time, it would be really helpful if you could reach out to the governor's office, sign this petition. And because if this bill doesn't get signed before the end of the year, it dies. So is the petition only for New York voters? No, I signed it. You can sign it. I think it asks you, if I remember correctly, it asks you what state you're from. And I put Texas. So and then also, if you're a New Jersey voter or a New Jerseyan, or you're just interested and want to tune in, the New Jersey Reparations Council is having its second virtual public session on December 4th. So anyone can tune into these online. And it's really exciting because what happened in New Jersey is that the legislators waited years and years and they didn't put the bill to a vote. So racial justice advocates took it upon themselves to convene their own commission, and they're still pushing for the legislation, but they're laying the groundwork now. And they're saying, no, we're not going to wait. We're going to keep pushing the issue. We're going to keep moving forward. We're going to create this kind of wealth of knowledge and community input that eventually can be used to either directly craft reparations legislation or can inform an eventual commission that's formed through legislative means. So if you want to tune into that session, you're welcome to do so. If you know New Jersey voters, spread the word. And there's in this link I sent to our website, there's info on how you can submit public comment. So feel free to share that information as well.
Caitlin, I suppose I should know, and I'm sorry I don't. Is there a single source of information about the various states that have reparations movements?
Yeah, I'll pull it up. So at the state level, there's really just California at this moment, and Illinois has something that's like never talked about, and supposedly they have a reparations commission, and it's kind of strange because there's really not any information about it. But so New York would kind of be the second state level task force of its kind, but there's tons happening at the local level. It's so hard to keep up, honestly. But African American Redress Network has
They have something.
a map.
They have some. It's like a resource, but it's not. It's by no means perfect. And in my opinion, it can use a bit of optimization. But there is a module that the African American Redress Network has had online for the last few years. They periodically update it, but the criterion that the information must be, the criterion for information that they put into the map seems to be kind of in my opinion not so much outdated, but not really with the zeitgeist of the moment. So we are typically talking about reparations task forces and commissions, and this talks about reparative justice measures that have been enacted through legislative means. But what the current situation calls for and what our current conception of what that situation would be is that before you have anything of substance, there needs to be a commission enacted through legislative means. So I don't think the map shows all of them, but it does make an admirable attempt to kind of solidify and compile all the data in an interactive map of the United States of America, showing the wide berth of different kinds of legislative means and actions, and also the state of the art for task forces and commissions enacted so far. But like I said, I think this map could be optimized a little bit more for the current situation at hand.
Great, thank you very much.
Welcome.
So did you have a last comment?
I had two things. One, I was interested in how people were feeling about the conversation. I don't know if people want to put like a word or something in the chat box. If this wasn't satisfying, or if it wasn't what you were expecting, that's fine. Like, it's good for us to know, like, did this live up to your expectations? Are you feeling excited about the platform process and kitchen table talks, or not? Or is there something, you know, you think we should do? So it'd be really great to hear what people are feeling. A word is fine. And then I was just going to say that there's, while you're contemplating that, we're going into a really important election, like really important. So I'm putting in the volunteer with DA link to let people know, you know, you can look, there's lots of things to do, and it's not, like, there's just a wide range. You can work on writing stuff, you can be phoning voters, you can help with voter assistance, like people call and share they have, you know, a problem, or people don't get back to them from the local election office or whatever. If you do graphic design, if you want to help organize events, like, there is a lot to do. So I'm just popping that link in there because it really is all hands on deck.
Thank you very much, Sue. I see that Alan sometimes is using a Kleenex, and I have one at hand here too. We're getting into that season where you know what can happen, and it's happening to Alan and it's happening to Bruce. And I want to say, let's all try to stay healthy as we go through the rest of the fall and the winter, because we're all in this together.